Hello and welcome to the Criminology session for Year 13 for 2023. This is brought to you by e-sgol, and I will be your presenter for the following sessions. My name is Mr. Ian Jones. I'm a criminology teacher for e-sgol and work in a number of schools in Ceredigion, as well as a couple in Carmarthenshire teaching criminology. Now, what I intend doing for the next 3 sessions is discussing matters to do with 3.3 and 3.4. Now, I assume that you all already would have done 3.1 and 3.2, which is the role and contribution of agencies towards social control. So you will have looked at what the police do, what their powers are, what their roles are. You would have looked at the prison service, you would have looked at the CPS, you would have looked at the court system. So you know something about how they're set up, how their role, what they actually do. So this is following on from that, which is that is more about describing what they do. Now, as you can see on the screen with 3.3, it's about examining the limitations on agencies in achieving social control. So that will be the focus of my presentation for you today. In the second session, I will be evaluating the effectiveness of agencies in achieving social control. Now, that obviously means looking at their strengths, what they do effectively, and looking at the things that they do which are less effective, or areas of their work where they have been criticized. And finally, in the last session, I'll be looking at exam questions, where questions about 3.3 and 3.4 have appeared on the exam paper itself. Now, the first thing to make clear is this word social control. It tends to throw pupils during exam time. Social control means more or less controlling behavior, because sometimes the question comes up and says something like, how is funding a limitation when attempting to achieve social control? And pupils get hung up on this word social control. What exactly does the question mean? Well, what it means is controlling behavior, making sure people do not break the law. Okay, so how is, for example, funding a limitation when it comes to controlling behavior and making people follow the law? Okay, so when you see those words social control, it means controlling behavior, okay? Stopping people from breaking the law. Now, in order to do this question, you need to look at 7 different aspects, okay? We need to look at reoffending, or recidivism, as it's called, the legal constraints or our civil liberties, which prevent agencies from controlling us too much. The access to resources we need to look at. Money, finance, we need to look at. Local and national policies, the environment, and crimes for moral reasons. Okay, so those are the 7 areas that we need to address for this particular question. And they have come up in the past. In 2019, for example, the question was, how were crimes committed for moral imperatives or moral reasons a limitation in achieving social control? In 2020, questions was about recidivism, reoffending, and how that was a limitation in trying to achieve social control. Also, there was a question on 2020, they were quite keen on this in 2020, how a lack of resources prevents or limits social control. And in 2022, there was a question about how finance limits agencies in achieving social control. Now, they could ask not just about agencies, but they could ask you about the police, how finance limits the police in achieving social control rather than agencies, which is all of them. So remember that, okay? But the questions have been in the past, as 4 of the 7 have come up. So the only one that hasn't come up is local and national policies, the environment, and civil liberties. Those are the 3 that haven't been. So perhaps focusing on that. Okay, so the limitations facing agencies in ensuring social control. The first one we're going to look at is reoffending rates, Now, of course, the problem with reoffending is that people are not changing their behaviours. Okay, reoffending rates are high. Now, there are 90,000 people in jail at the moment, as we speak, 2024, because the right realist view that more time equals less crime. So people spend more time in jail now than they have ever before. The Howard League for Penal Reform recently said that overcrowding in jails is at emergency levels. And you would have seen in the news during November and December 2023 a lot of talk about overcrowding in prisons and the fact that people had to be let out of jail early, on early release, on early license, so that they could accommodate more serious prisoners. So this is a big problem when it comes to prison population and reoffending rates. Now, why? Well, the reason is if you've been in jail for 12, if you've been in jail, there's 12 months of supervision after prison, and many are now being recalled for reoffending. Now, there are various reasons for that, which I'll get onto during the course of this presentation. But 48% of adults reoffend within a year of going to prison. If they've been to prison for less than 12 months, then the reoffending rate is 63%. Females that have been to jail for less than 12 months, 73% of them reoffend within 12 months of being released. And with children or those under 18 years old, the reoffending rate is 77%. Will reoffend in prison if they've been there for less than 12 months. So this is a massive cost, okay? And this cost is a limitation, which we'll get onto when we discuss finance. £18.1 billion is spent on people who reoffend. Now, another reason prisons are full is that prison sentences are much longer now. The right realist ideology is in control. So you now spend, on average, for violent crimes, 26 months more in jail than you would have in 2003. A life sentence also in 2003 would have been something like 12 years and 5 months, actual time spent in prison. But now it's more 21 years and 3 months. So, these are reasons why prisons are overcrowded. And violent crimes, we've seen sentences are generally, much larger than they used to be. Okay. Now the problem is, of course, is that prisons are not working. That is the limitation. What you want to happen is that people go to prison, they learn their mistakes, and they come out and do not reoffend. So that is a way of controlling behavior, social control. But it's not working. All those statistics tell you that the reoffending rates are very, very high. Okay, so that is a limitation in achieving social control. There's overcrowding in prisons. So there's two things here. Overcrowding means less resources, less staff, less time to rehabilitate offenders, be that do anger management courses or do alcohol abuse courses, or just generally reintegrate prisoners back into society. There's no time for it. As a result, reoffending rates are higher. Okay, more time is spent in the cells now than ever before. Attacks on staff and suicide rates are high. Costs are spiraling. So, and they let prisoners out on license early because of overcrowding. So the implication, of course, of leaving people out of jail early is, the right would argue, that it doesn't give enough time for rehabilitation. Right? So this is a massive limitation on the ability of, let's say, the prisons, for example, to ensure social control in making sure people do not break the law. Okay, so that's the first one, and there was a question of this back in 22, I think, was recidivism. Okay. Okay, now then, there'll be different views about this from different sociological perspectives. A social learning theory, first of all, would say that prisons are merely universities of crime, right? So the problem with social control is you can't control behavior if they're going into prisons and actually learning, right? Learning or copying, as social learning theory would have you believe, criminal behavior. So they're actually learning to be better criminals. Well, actually they're not, are they? Because the reoffending rates are high, so they're obviously being caught as well. But they're learning new tricks. They're still unsuccessful, but they're learning new tricks. They're becoming more accomplished criminals. So they copy the behavior they see. So this is, again, a problem. Why? It's not working. That is a limitation. We're not able to control behavior. We're not able to ensure social control. Marxists would have you believe that the law is against the poorer people. The police are policing the poor. Right? This is an unequal society. It's a crimogenic society, right? Which encourages law breaking. Why? Because people are being treated unequally. At the top, you've got the bourgeois who own all the property, who all have all the money, the elite, and the proletariat, the poorer people. There is a massive wealth inequality there, and the only way that they can achieve this wealth is by breaking the law. Okay, and Marxists really believe that the state oppressive apparatus, which is the police and the courts, so it's a state issue. Inequality equals crime equals reoffending, right? Unless the entire system is turned on its head and another political way is seen. So that's why Marxists would say it's a limitation, because nothing to do really with the prisons, and the entire system. The entire system is broken. Interactionalists would argue the limitation is when you go to prison, you get a label, right? The label you receive is criminal. You can't escape from it. You cannot escape from it. It becomes, if you remember, you worked from Unit 2, a self-fulfilling prophecy. You internalize that label. You become that label. You become criminal, and the pressure group Unlock would agree with that. They would say, yes, indeed, that is exactly what happens when you go to prison. When you come out, you just cannot get rid of that label of being a prisoner or being an offender. Okay, so that is a big problem that you can't escape from. The right wing, of course, would argue that punishments are too soft, and this is why reoffending rates are high, because there's nothing to fear from going to prison. People make a rational choice to break the law. The right would have you agree. So therefore, they look at the cost benefit, and the cost and the punishment, therefore, must be more severe. And this is why we've seen an increase in the number of people in prison, then an increase in the number of people called back to prison during license or when they're early released. And this is why we have a rise in the number of months and years given as part of sentencing, which are a lot more severe these days, but not severe enough, according to the right wing. Okay, so we need to be more severe, is the limitation. The right would say is that we're not severe enough. Okay, and that's the limitation. So you can see, therefore, how your elements of Unit 2 can be used there as a discussion when you're discussing reoffending rates and why that is a limitation. Okay, all the problems it brings about. It's just not working. Okay. Now then, the next one to discuss is civil liberties and legal barriers, which hasn't been a question asked in an exam paper since 2019. Of course, we all have civil rights, and it's a good thing. Okay. Now, this is a limitation, but I would argue it's a limitation in a good way, because this prevents the agencies of social control, police, judges, probation service, it prevents them from impeding our rights. Okay, so in this case, this is a limitation for a good thing, if you know what I mean. Because if they had the right to do whatever they wanted, then that would be a pretty oppressive state. Now, the first one is, of course, we have the freedom of speech that was enshrined in the Magna Carta as far back as 1215. But we do not have the right to stoke racist or sexist hatred or cause harm to others. through your words or impede on national security. Okay, so we have these rights to say what we want, but only within a certain parameters. Okay, again, freedom of movement, we have that. That has been curtailed somewhat by Brexit, because there was the freedom of movement of goods, and there was the freedom of movement for citizens across Europe before Brexit was implemented. Best not say many more about that. Yeah, so we have the freedom of movement. We can move wherever we want. Okay, next one, freedom from arrest. Of course, this is enshrined in Article 5 of the Human Rights Act. Okay, we have the freedom to go about our business without being arrested, as long as the law allows that. If we break the law, of course, then we can be arrested. You have the freedom of assembly, or freedom of congregation. Now, this is an interesting one of late. Now, you can do it, but there are certain limitations when it comes, for example, for picketing. If you're on strike, there are certain things stopping you from doing that. Also, you have to pay to protest now, in that if it needs police supervision, then there could be an element of cost there. But you can be stopped protesting for national security reasons, or to prevent you from breaking the law, or if you're impeding the rights of others. Now, interesting enough, in 2023, and this is an interesting point for you to make, there was a public order bill passed, and you may have seen reference to this in newspaper articles in the news. Now, the Public Order Act of 2023 has added to the reasons that police could stop you from protesting. For example, if you're carrying locking on equipment, that means if you're carrying chains or locks that you intend to use in order to chain yourself to a building, much as the suffragettes did before the First World War, or if you're carrying glue, which you're likely to use to stick yourself onto the floors, as we've seen with some Extinction Rebellion people doing, and it all comes from because of a reaction to the what Extinction Rebellion have been doing. You can also be arrested now if you protest and you obstruct major transport. Now, we've seen Extinction Rebellion sitting in front of cars, sitting in front of buses, obstructing key transport. Now you can be arrested for doing that now. If you also interfere, now this is an interesting one, if you interfere with national infrastructure, now that's quite a vague, it'll be interesting to see judges do a interpretation of what exactly national infrastructure would entail. But if you interfere with national infrastructure, key national infrastructure, then you can be arrested as well. So the limitations you see here, and as well as the police have the right, during a protest, to stop and search if they think you've got locking equipment on you. So they've got more rights to stop and search you now. So the implication of civil liberties and legal barriers is mostly positive. Okay, it stops our rights, and certainly the Marxists would agree that it stops the elite from oppressing the proletariat. Well, the Marxists believe they are being oppressed anyway, but oppressing the proletariat too much, to prevent the elite from really exercising excessive control over people. So they would see this as a good thing, as a thing that limits social control, but for a good reason. But there is an element there of the limitations being taken away when it comes to right to congregate and freedom to assemble. Okay, and the final one on the list there is freedom to worship, of course. And that is, again, Human Rights Act, Article 9 in this case, which gives you the right to worship and follow, wear religious clothing, and to follow religious holidays. Okay, so those legal rights there, they are a limitation, but they're good limitation, you know what I mean? It's to prevent an over-oppressive system. You can see Abu Abu Qatada there on the screen. Now there was a complaint. This was a complaint that his religious rights and his rights to say things of extreme nature, they couldn't do anything about him because he had the right to say what he was saying because of his religion. So there was a big debate about this. Okay, please Google it. Abu Qatada. He was saying radical messages, and he was facing being deported to Jordan. But he said that he was saying these things under the freedom of speech. So he was quite extreme, and this was limiting the police's ability to do something to stop him, and it was a major political issue. Please have a look at it. Theresa May was involved, the ex-Prime Minister, who was Home Secretary at the time, but it's an interesting one to look at. Okay, access to resources and support is a problem, okay, is a limitation, because if you don't have resources, if people don't have support, then they're going to reoffend. You cannot control people's behavior. You can't turn them around if you don't have the resources, if you don't have the support that they need in order to turn their lives around. That is impossible. Now, left-wing views, of course, are that we need more support. We need more support systems. We need more staff. We need more money because interventions are needed. If we take, for example, in prisons, I've just mentioned before, that you need the anger management courses, you need the behavioral courses, you need the cognitive behavioral therapy, you need the drug therapies, you need the education. Okay, so all those resources and support, if they're not in place, then you're going to limit your ability to social control, limit your ability to control people's behavior. Because if you're in prison, clearly there needs to be a change of behavior. If you don't have the resources and the support necessary to do that, it's going to be a problem. So you have, the Unlock charity, of course, does a lot of brings a lot of focus onto this. They work with government, or they try to work with government to get rid of this discrimination that prisoners have, and the lack of support that they have in prison in order to turn their lives around, and the lack of support they have outside prison. When they are released from prison, the lack of support they have outside prison. So the Unlock is one charity that works very hard on this issue, because there are problems. When people leave prisons, they have problems with housing. They don't have jobs, and in variety, only 1 in every 4 actually has a job to go to. Training is limited, right? And they face clear discrimination when they come out of prison, or when they're trying to find work. This is a problem, okay? That can only be answered by resources and support. But if you don't have resources and support, it's a limitation. Low literacy skills. The average reading age of a prisoner is 11 years old. Now, that's 62% of prisoners have reading age below 11 years old. Okay, or of an 11 years old. Now, that's very low. The general population figure is 15%, but the prisoner population is 62%. So obviously, resources need to be targeted towards improving literacy skills as well as numerical skills, which I think the numerical skills of the average prisoner is about 9 years old. Okay, I don't think it's much higher, mind you, in the general population, but it certainly is higher. Okay, so what chance really of not reoffending? Okay, 13 understaffing, cuts. We'll discuss that when we look at finances, but understaffing is a very, very real problem. So what chance really of not reoffending? When you go to prison, you lose any housing benefit. That goes. 20% leave jails without a house. They don't have a house to go to. 20%. Third of prisons were deemed by Ofsted to have had insufficient educational provision, because this is important when it comes to rehabilitation. If the support is not there, if the resources aren't there, they're going to reoffend again. Okay. When you're released from prison, you are given a grant of £46. That has been the same since 1997. which is a problem in itself. Yeah, only, as I said, only 25% who leave prison have jobs. Only 1 in 9 have a house to go to. So these figures are problems. They don't have the access to support and resources that will allow them to change their behaviour, that will allow social control to happen. You've got the ROTL, which is release on a temporary license, of course, which will happen again. Problem is they're released on temporary license and there's not the resources there to support them. There's no staff to support them, to give them that support. And a major problem is that the prisoners are often released on Friday, which means, of course, when it comes to Friday, they're released in the afternoon. There's all the resources they need are shut for the weekend. All the support they need are not there till the Monday. Okay. Yeah, this is a problem. The right realist would tell you, of course, that the more time people are in jail, the more chance there is to rehabilitate them. So the more resources and the more support they get, the longer, because the sentence is longer. Well, that's debatable, but it's certainly one argument that's being put forward. Okay, and next one is finance, and this was a question in 2022, as it happens. Okay, now finance, of course, is everything. Unless you believe in the milk of human kindness, things need to be paid for. At the end of the day. Now, as you can see, there's been cuts across a wide range of services up to 2020. There's been some turnaround now since 2021-22, but with an election due in 2024 this year, I'm sure, then and promised tax cuts, of course, then of course the finance is going to be an issue yet again from 2024 onwards, with the war in Ukraine affecting finances, the cost of living crisis affecting finances, dubious political decisions affecting finances. So there have been cuts. Police budget has been cut 18% since 2010. There are 20,000 less policemen to be had now, which is a huge issue when trying to control people, when trying to ensure social control. There has been a bit of a turnaround of late, and they have employed more police. But as I've just said, in 2024, we will just have to wait to see what happens on that front, because of the suspected tax cuts will need, of course, to be less finance available. As you can see, Crown Prosecution Services have had massive cuts, and this has led to the accusation that they just follow. They are prosecuting easier crimes. Okay, crimes that are easier, lesser offences, because they're easier to prove, to save money. Now, whether that's true or not, the Crown Prosecution Service denies it. And this is also a claim made about the police, that they follow up with the lead of the CPS on lesser crimes, because A, it helps them reach their targets without spending too much money, and B, easier to arrest. So, to get a result. Cuts to a third of the CPS staff in the last in the period up to 2020, again being brought back a little now, but we'll have to wait to 2024 to see what happens there. And the probation service have massive issues with recruiting staff shortages. The private companies that were doing some of the work that the probation service is doing have now been disbanded. So all their work, I think there are 20 private companies doing the work as well, all their work now has gone back into the probation service, increasing their workload. Their finance has increased as well, obviously, but they have an increased workload and not enough staff at the moment. Now that's going into how effective they are as well, but there is an interlink between 3.3 and 3.4 here when we look at the limitations, because one of the limitations is finance, isn't it, and how effective they are. Okay, so there is some interlink there. Okay. Next one is national policies and local policies. Hasn't been a question on this. Like the CPS, going for particular crimes at a certain time at local level or national level can be a limitation, because if you target specific crimes, for example, on the screen, you can see hate crimes, which has been a national focus in 2017. If you're targeting those type of crimes, obviously other type of crimes are going to be on the increase. For example, in London, they are going after gang crimes and going after particular knife crimes. So if you do that, of course, then it means on a local level, other crimes are going unnoticed, perhaps drug crimes, etc., gang-related violence, VATP crimes. VATP is violence against the person. Okay, so this limits social control in certain areas of crime. Okay. Hate crime now is a national priority, of course. Now, if you think also of the Welsh situation, from Monday, January the 8th, the police will start stopping people for breaking the 20-mile-an-hour speed routes. Now, doing this, of course, is going to take resources away. If you're targeting urban areas where 20 miles per hour will now be enforced, obviously, there'll be less resources on motorway traffic management. There'll be less on rural communities traffic management issues. So these national policies, of course, they limit. They may increase in one area, but they will limit your ability for social control in other areas. Okay. Of course, there's also political, and says, because the question says here national policies, then there's also political ramifications. The current government, as you at the end of 2023, targeted vagrants. And if I'm sure you saw on social media or your TikToks, they were going to arrest vagrants and take away their tents. Well, okay, if you're doing that, if you're targeting vagrants, which is a law-breaking activity, you're going to miss out on other crimes. Okay, so that is important to look at as well as a limitation. Last but one is the environment. Okay, because that's a key issue. If you've broken the law, you go to prison, you get out of prison. What happens? You end up in the same environment you were when you went in. So now, when the environment is, as the Marxist would say, a crimogenic environment, one where there's inequality, then it's going to lead you back to reoffending. So that is a real limitation on social control, in the fact that it's inevitable that people are released into the same environment that turned them into criminals in the first place. Now, functionalists, or perhaps Merton specifically, would talk about the strain theory, that they broke the law in the first place because they didn't have the means to achieve the goals, the American dream, if you remember your work from Unit 2. They didn't have the means to achieve that goal, so they turned to crime. They innovated, right, as Merton would call it. They were innovators. So they turned towards crime through other means, drugs, stealing, etc., etc. Now, when you release them from prison, they go back to the same environment that caused them to end up prison in the first place. So it's very, very hard, of course, to think of or to expect a different outcome than you've had in the first place. Only 25% of prisoners on being released have a job to go to. 12% of employers said that they would employ somebody with a criminal record. No, that is not a lot. 12%. That means 88% of employers would not employ somebody with a criminal record. Well, what chance does that give them? Right? What chance does that give them? Interaction with, say, they're being labelled, okay, and that is the limitation there. They're labelled. They're going to end up in the same environment, in the same situation they were before. Most do not have a firm family support system. 68% of prisoners don't get any family visits. And again, 61% of prisoners who are released do end up back in their own families, which is a safer environment than the other 39% whom end up sofa surfing or go from apartment to apartment or house to house. So, we really don't know what the situation is regarding those people. Okay, so environment is a big factor. That hasn't been a question. It's a big factor limiting agencies' ability to control, implement social control, because if the environment that made them criminals in the first place is the same environment they're coming back to after prison, it's a non-brainer, isn't it? So it's a very hard one to answer that, really, unless you've trained and given the resources and support system when they're in prison and when they come out of prison to lead them onto a more legitimate path. But I think we're months, if not years, away from that kind of. Switzerland, for example, are going down this route where the support systems are in place and they teach them skills, valuable skills that they can use in the community when they're released. But have a Google with that at what they're doing there. The last one is morally motivated crimes. Now, not to be confused with moral crimes, which you probably did in Unit 1 when you were discussing different type of crime. These are morally motivated crimes. So what this means is they're crimes that are committed by people because they truly believe they are doing the right thing. Okay. Now, what's the limitation with that? Well, the limitation is if they think they're doing the right thing, then they're not going to change their behavior. Okay, the behavior is not going to be changed. Now, I've mentioned Extinction Rebellion before. Why are they doing what they're doing? They're throwing dust on tennis courts and disrupting test matches and stopping in the middle of the road. Why? Because they are convinced that they are doing the right thing. Okay, and much as the suffragettes were convinced they were doing the right thing, much as the same as civil rights movement were convinced they were doing the right thing, Extinction Rebellion find themselves in the same situation where morally they are defending their actions. So it's a limitation. It's very hard to socially control people who believe they're doing the right thing. Okay. Now, the couple of examples you have on the screen there is your teacher probably has talked about Kate Gilderdale. She gave her daughter Lynn Gilderdale drugs to help her to die, so it was an assisted suicide. But she was suffering from chronic fatigue system, and her mother had been looking after her for 17 years, and the quality of life was such that, drastic steps were taken. Again, she broke the law by doing this, of course, but she had a 1-year conditional discharge. So, how do you stop this from happening again when the sentence itself was lenient because it was a morally motivated crime? So social control in this respect is difficult because we have compassion, we have sympathy as well. The group you see at the top there, the Stansted 15, they tied themselves to an aeroplane because they were going to extradite or deport 60 people back to Nigeria. And it was felt that if they were extradited back to Nigeria, they would face violence against them. So the 15 here basically destroyed the aeroplane that was going to carry them over back to Nigeria, which could have been quite hairy for them because you can actually get life imprisonment for intentional disruption of an aerodrome. But as it happened, they were not sentenced harshly. I think the jury found them not guilty, despite the fact that they actually were guilty. But because they were morally motivated, the jury thought, well, they probably did. Well, we don't know why the jury said we're not allowed to ask the jury why they did what they did. But morally motivated crimes, are a limitation. Alan Blythe is another example your teachers might have referred to. Grew cannabis to help his wife, who was very ill from MS. Again, he could be argued he was supplying drugs, a controlled substance, supplying and growing controlled substance. Again, he was given a £100 fine for possession. So, crimes carried out for morally motivated crimes, it's a limitation, okay, on social control, on controlling behavior. And those are just a couple of examples. You've got Extinction Rebellion as well as an example there, which is more probably TikTokable as an example. Okay, well, thank you for listening to 3.3. A lot of me talking, but that's the nature of 3.3. 3.4 is much the same, but we will be next week evaluating, that's next session, sorry, evaluating the effectiveness of agencies in achieving social control. So this will tie in really with 3.3 and 3.4 together, because effectiveness and limitations, effective, non-effective, so limitations will come in there as well. And then because they are the most problematic questions on the exam paper in Unit 4, we'll look at some of the exam questions based on 3.3 and 3.4. Because this idea of social control does throw candidates, when they have a question in achieving social control or in limiting social control, candidates get a bit confused about what exactly do I need to write about here? What exactly do they mean by social control? Okay, so I'll be banging on about that. Social control is controlling behavior, making sure people stick to the law. Okay, so more about that in the next presentation. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in, and please do move on to presentation 2 at your earliest convenience. Thank you.